Perfect. Well, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining our session today. One ask is if we can turn on our headsets, there will be some translation. Looking forward to spending time with our esteemed panelists on this discussion today around rare earths. And I think to kick it off, I'd love to start from where things are changing. Gracelin, as director focused on strategic minerals and critical minerals for CSIS, how has the conversation changed from, say, a year ago, where there's a lot of recognition of gaps, we need to go do something? What have you heard in terms of what the current state of affairs is?
Thanks so much for having me. It's great to be back. 2025 was transformational for mineral security. And a lot of that stemmed from what happened in April last year when China imposed rare earth export restrictions, not just on the United States, but the world at large. So whether you were in Europe, you were Japan, you were the United States, you felt those restrictions. Now, I think there are really three lessons that we can take away from what happened last year. The first is that rare earths are absolutely vital to national security, economic security, and energy independence. And what we really saw was within 6 weeks of those rare earth export restrictions going into effect, Suzuki stopped manufacturing the Swift model in Japan. You saw Ford stop manufacturing in Chicago. So minerals were no longer seen just as commodities. Rare earths were really seen as strategic assets. The second thing we saw is that we can't do it alone in the United States. There again, we started with this kind of, the US is going at it alone, but very quickly, rare earths actually reshaped our foreign policy. You saw it feature in conversations around Greenland, Saudi Arabia, Ukraine, Brazil. And what that really showed us was that we don't have, number one, all of the geological reserves that we need because China imposed restrictions on heavy rare earths. And we saw particularly the kingdom became a really crucial partner because they have great endowments of heavy rare earths. And you saw the US Department of War actually take that equity stake in a refinery here. And the final thing we saw is that we couldn't just think about mining in a vacuum. We had to think about vertical integration. So how do we ensure that we have the feedstock, that we're building our refining capabilities so that 99% of feedstock isn't concentrated in a single country, and then ensure that the offtake is going to manufacturing firms within our allies.
Thank you so much. Carlos, as head of geopolitics and political affairs for S&P, what is it that you see that's happening on the global scale? Anything to add in terms of building on what Gracelin mentioned from the current state and some of the things we need to think about?
Sorry, I couldn't hear you very well.
Oh, apologies. Can you hear me better now?
Better, yeah.
I was saying, building on what kind of Gracelin had, any other kind of global views, maybe it's the resiliency of supply chains that you'd like to add in terms of where we are today?
Sure, no, absolutely. First of all, I completely agree with everything that Gracelin said. And last April, May was a wake-up call for the international community in the United States. So let me just put it in a little bit of context first. Remember that we had gone to the point where the United States had imposed tariffs of 145% on China, and China reciprocated with 125%. What brought the United States to the negotiating table? What made the United States bring China to the negotiating table? And it's exactly this issue that Gracelin said. It was the embargo that China had placed on rare earths. And Ford, the CEO of Ford, was the first one to raise his hand and basically say, we're going to start shutting plants if we don't have that embargo lifted and if we don't get access to rare earths and the magnets that are necessary to be able to continue with our production. What it began to tell the world, and I think this is really kind of the national issue, Will, that we all have to come back to, is that fundamentally, rare earths and the high-powered magnets that come out of them are fundamental to industrialization processes throughout the world. We've seen it in the automotive industry, it's critical in the aircraft industry, it's fundamental in the defense industry, from everything from aeronautics to warships to the creation of drones, and it's critical to energy transition and the production of transformers. When you begin to put it that way, suddenly there is this recognition that there has to be some form of access and security of supply to rare earths and magnets, because it's not just a question of a mineral, it's not one country, it's really global access and supply. So it brings us back to, I think, a critical issue that Gracelin's put on the table. How do you create the reliability of supply chains in order to be able to do this? And I know you're going to want to talk about timing issues later, but I think what I'd like you to keep in mind is that if you have that kind of leverage in the short term, all right, what can you do to be able to redress it? And this is where we come back to the question that Gracelin has put on the table, that one country alone isn't going to fix this. It's going to take the participation and the cooperation of many countries working together in the diversification of supply chains from the production side to the processing side to the product side in order to be able to have the security of supply on something which is, number one, fundamental to our economic modernization and industrialization, and two, which has been critical to national security as well.
I guess to follow on to that too is there's a lot of challenges, and I think another question I have, Carlos, is what does the market look like? Like you mentioned that a lot of these things that we get from rare earths, the magnets, like they underpin our society, and that's growing. We talk about electrical power, motors. What does it look like from a global perspective? Like, do we have a large gap? Like, how intense is this issue?
So, to be able to understand that question and be able to answer it, let's put it against a goal. And let's put it against the goal of the diversification of the supply chain. And today, the reality that we have is that somewhere between 80 and 90%, different estimates that you'll see, of the processing of rare earths and the production of magnets is concentrated in one country, right? China specifically. So if we look at it from that perspective of demand outside of China, 10% of it is met by production and processing outside of China. If you add on to that everything which is under construction, everything that is potentially expanded, and projects that have been announced, and let's assume that all of them are completed, right? And that's a big assumption. We would still have about a 2/3 gap between the demand outside of China and the actual supply. And it begins to tell us that if that diversification of supply chain is going to be critical to having many different countries participating in the process, it's going to take many more actors. It's going to mean that you're going to have to address the mining questions as a fundamental issue of the source of supply. You're going to have investment in the refining. You're going to have investment in the production of end products and magnets and the quality that's necessary, and then all of the issues that are necessary to be able to make those factors come to life.
Well, I think that ties into a great question for yourself, Turkey, as Deputy Minister of Mine Development, is what opportunities do companies like Saudi Arabia have to kind of help that and move up this value chain and help us build these resilient supply chains that we're clearly in need of today?
Sure. Thank you, Will, and I would like to highlight that it's a great pleasure to be part of this distinguished group of experts and leaders, and welcome also our audience. So rare earth plays a major part of our mining sector in Saudi Arabia, as well as our strategic development plans for the sector. Since the inception of Saudi Arabia's mining strategy in 2017, we have been making remarkable progress in terms of transforming the sector to be the third pillar of the Saudi industry after oil and petrochemicals. So it has a major role, and with all the transformational steps and actions we have been taking to grow the sector in terms of exploration and making it more attractive for investors, as well as the reform that we have also seen in the regulation and streamlining the licensing, and the support that is provided by the government in terms of enabling and de-risking exploration. Thus, on the upstream, also similar mechanisms are happening at the midstream and downstream across the sector. All of this has resulted in tangible impacts, and one of these tangible impacts is the recent discovery of a major rare earth deposit in Saudi Arabia. It is considered as the fourth largest in terms of value, and the unique advantage about this deposit is it's mainly contains the heavy rare earth elements, which is important, of course, as we hear, for magnets that is almost used in everything in our life. I always say about rare earth, it's like the vitamins of the industrial system. They're used in small quantities, but these industries cannot function without them. So we have an ambitious plan to develop the entire value chain, starting from the upstream mining, and we have also got to an advanced stage in exploring our resources. So they are in an advanced stage of development, and we are targeting also the development of separation as well as the magnet production, which links very well to our industrial strategy that is quite mineral intensive in terms of the demand that we're expecting. And rare earth, of course, magnets will be very important for our localization targets when it comes to the energy sector. We are targeting the localization of almost 40 gigawatt of power for wind turbines, and that consumes large amount of magnets, in addition to our plans for the automotive industry, where we are planning to produce more than 300,000 vehicles. So there is a good demand locally, but we're not just relying on our local demand. We believe there is a global opportunity as a result of the dynamics that we are seeing in terms of the supply chain concentration and the need to diversify the supply, but also the growth in the market, which has been also mentioned by Carlos. There is a tremendous growth that is going to come, and additional sources of supplies are needed.
And I think on that point of supply, I'd love to go to yourself, and as someone, at Solvay, you're actually making these materials. What are some of the challenges or hurdles that we face today to really encourage that happening? Would love to hear some of the challenges that you're facing as someone who's a producer. Oh, Anne, sorry.
Yes. No, pleased to be here. There is quite some challenges, I would say, but it's not about technology so much. I think there's a lot of technology. I can say as separation technology, for example, there's different ways. There is an building up, so we haven't been standing still on our technology. The innovation has been continuing through. I think AI, what we see, AI helps us a lot to even be more competitive than we have ever been. As Solvay, we've been the largest capacity of separation outside Asia, and running assets for 80 years now also. So it's so the technology we see there, we need to continue to build. What actually is what we see as the topic of today is the speed. How quickly can we build up this whole value chain, this resilient chain? And to what we see, it's not the physical time to build a mine or the physical time to build a separation unit, but it's really and somewhat the chicken and the egg today, because for a mine you need develop a mine, you need quite some resources, financial resources, But at the other hand, you need also for the magnets, you need an ability or a willingness to pay for security of supply. And this is where we see for the moment quite some uncertainty, and uncertainty is not good for investments. So there it's where we see we can really use more structure from the market side. So we're really talking about the market side. And I heard, for example, this could be tariffs, this could be really putting kind of pricing forward. I heard about an initiative in S&P putting forward to creating an assessment first. So I think there's many ways, there's ways needed to speed that up, and that's where we're working all together on here. Yeah.
And Anna, Paula, from your side, giving kind of that South American Brazil look, what are the challenges that you see that are happening today?
I'm sorry, but I will speak in Portuguese if you don't mind. I feel more comfortable.
Thank you for the invitation. It's a pleasure being with you today. In the Brazilian perspective, we have, yes, several challenges. As a country that have a lot of resources. We have a lot of reserves, significant rare earth. We're the second one in the ranking of reserves. And Brazil has a very big experience in mining. Mining of ore, copper, aluminum. But we face the challenge of new mining. The rare earth mining for the concentration of the chains, but for our perspective of a producer country, we have a challenge to incorporate in our production processes a mining where we still don't have the tradition, harnessing all of the environment of the country, and that is favorable for the mining sector. I would say that in this sense, and recognizing the need of diversification of the chains, our biggest challenge today is to transform these reserves in effective mining production, which is a challenge that has to be faced by many actors, the government, improving this environment, especially the regulations, giving visibility of the licensing, prioritizing strategic projects. But we also face a big challenge in the perspective of investments because of this uncertainty in the chain. There are investments that are high. To be able to transform these reserves in the mining production, we still see, from the government perspective, to support these projects, the need of the capital that would take this risk. We need the support from the credit market. We need, above all, of guarantees in these credit operations. This is the situation that Brazil's been facing nowadays. And wanting to advance in the chains with, like many other producer countries have, in our country we also have a technological challenge. The technology is there. We have the challenge to develop this technological route that is competitive economically. So there are many. The horizon is very promising. The solution goes through a coordinated effort: government, market of capitals, investors, miners.
I think with that, we talked a lot about I call it primary value chain, but Anne, I might go back to yourself for this. Do we see recycling playing a material part in the near term? What does secondary supply look like? And how does that play a part, say, either today or maybe 10 years from now?
No, it's a very important question. I think we all want to be sustainable, and recycling is an important answer to that. No, today, for magnets, there's only limited magnets available, as it is a growing market, as Carlos was saying. So what we see with it, some calculation, we said it will take up to 2035 and beyond before to have really significant volumes that will help us to create that cycle. Okay. Today we have limited volumes in recycling. We use them, of course, because this is crucial in the chain, but to really be reliant on it, it will be up to later on, 2035. And we are developing in the industry the right technologies for that.
I think with that and a lot of like these challenges, when we think of opportunities, Turkey, I might look to yourself of when we're looking at, how we can invest and diversify and build that long-term collaboration, how can government and industry work closer together to really help address those challenges, to, develop that sustainable access to these critical minerals?
Sure. I think that's a very important question because looking at all these challenges that we hear, I think the government has to take a major role in this particular value chain, but overall in the oil mining sector. But I think one of the greatest things that we can cite as an example is the recent cooperations between the US and Saudi Arabia after signing a strategic framework agreement on ensuring the resilience of the critical mineral supply chains, of which we have prioritized rare earth value chain as one of the most ready opportunities. And I think this kind of partnership is very important because for us in Saudi Arabia, it brings several values. First is the access to working with our partners in the US to access the technology for the separation, but also on the market side, because accessing the market is also very important, and having the stability of the market to de-risk these investments. So we hope that this agreement and this project will bring major benefits both to Saudi Arabia and the US in terms of securing the needs for these materials. But we also believe that more has to be done in that front. So, the government-to-government work to establish regional supply chains, this is very important. So it doesn't have all to happen in one place. So one country could have the resources, other countries could have the processing and so on and so forth. The other major also important point is basically the financing required for this industry. Considering the risks and the price volatility in the market, I think this industry needs another way of government attention and government support in terms of patient capital that has to be invested in infrastructure and even in processing facility, and also guarantees on the market, which also provides a certainty for investors and banks to fund these projects. In addition to that, of course, we can also leverage on local content policies to also encourage the full localization of this industry in our market.
And thinking from a bigger view, Grace, I'd love to get your take of what do you think is the priorities for collaboration? If we look beyond maybe just one region, but just big picture, what do you think we need to collaborate on the most to make this successful?
I think Turkey hit the nail on the head. I mean, we are living in a very vertically integrated world globally. If you look at the top 10 countries in the world that received rare earth exploration last year, 4 of them are in Africa. And then you have Saudi Arabia, Australia, Canada, the US. And this is really important because not every one of these countries is going to be able to develop the processing capabilities. As you said, it's highly capital intensive. It's also technically quite complicated. So there's a reason, globally that China has excelled in this space. They have the human capital. They've deployed the financial capital. They have the infrastructure. So no one country can go at it alone, I think, from that perspective. The second thing I'd say is, how are we willing to deploy industrial policy interventions? Industrial policy, at least from an American perspective, can be a little bit controversial. But the thing that we forget is, Japan subsidized Honda for decades before it was profitable, and we don't use Nokias anymore, but Finland once did that too. We are talking about a very nascent industry. So when you have a nascent industry, an infant industry, it does require support mechanisms, right? We saw that equity between the US-Saudi agreement was a really important part to stimulate that investment. We also see price floors at a time when you have price volatility. Price floors shouldn't need to last forever. It's a time-bound mechanism, and what it does is it levels the playing field. After the US announced the support to MP Materials, you saw that Apple, General Motors signed these offtake agreements. So what you're doing with some of these interventions is you're not only bolstering supply, you're also bolstering demand, and that's how you create a sustainable market with better prices. So it's working in a globally integrated way, finding the places that have the feedstock, finding the places that have a processing hub. Saudi Arabia is an invaluable processing partner because they have the cheapest energy, some of the cheapest energy on earth, both fossil fuels and renewables. And rare earth processing is extremely energy intensive. It's geographically proximate to those 4 of the 10 jurisdictions in Africa. And then it also requires matching that with appropriate industrial policy interventions, price support, et cetera, to ensure that these projects can stay economic, because what we're doing is making sure we have economically viable supply chains.
Wonderful. And I think, looking ahead, so we've talked a bit about what's going on today, what's needed. If we're in the same stage tomorrow, a year from now, what would you think is the most important thing to happen between today and that day? And maybe I'll start at the end with yourself, Carlos.
Well, one of the practical things that we can do that are complementary to all the points that have been mentioned is how to create greater transparency around prices and price formation, because that in the end becomes critical to understanding investment incentives. It helps individual companies understand where they operate, what they're buying, and where they can be competitive in the production process and in the processing process. And so just today, S&P Global has announced, the Platts component of S&P has announced that on March 31st that we're going to launch 4 price assessments on supply chains for rare earth elements. And what they will do is to look at different components of rare earths and the supply chains that are formed to be able to produce them, to allow us to have greater transparency of what the price is that's traded in the marketplace. So we have an understanding for those who are buying what they can compare across different prices. And for those that are in the industry, they can also have a reference point to understand if they're competitive. And so we're hoping that by putting that out there in the marketplace, that one of the things that it can trigger is the development of supply chains outside of China as well, not to put this in a China versus everybody else perspective, but to put it back in the context of what we started out with, the importance of resilience in supply chains, and that's going to be one of the mechanisms that allows industry to make judgments on how to be able to judge the marketplace.
And how would that feel if you actually had a floor price or an understanding of where pricing is? Would your life be a little bit easier as a producer?
So that's really music in the ears, I would say. We need this structure on the pricing. I think the other thing, and it was mentioned with our Other guests need to have the support of the government. It's really have this hand in hand. And then the third is the collaboration between this chain. I think collaboration is key.
Agreed.
Yeah.
With that, I just wanted to say thank you all for the time. It's been a great conversation, and look forward to the other ones as we have this conference. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah.